Grace and peace to you from the one who is, and who was, and who is to come. How many of you have ever seen one of those bumper stickers that says, "In case of rapture, this car will be unmanned"? I see some nods and some hands going up. The rapture is the idea that at some point before the end of the world, Jesus is going to miracle away all of the righteous people up into heaven to be with him, leaving all the wicked people behind to suffer. This idea comes from piecing together assorted bits and parts of the Bible that usually include our gospel for today. Jesus says, 2 will be in the field, 1 will be taken and 1 will be left. 2 women will be grinding meal together, 1 will be taken and 1 will be left. If you assume the one taken from the field and the one taken from the mill were the ones taken away to be with God, then the "in case of rapture, this car will be unmanned" bumper sticker reflects the driver's confidence that he or she is going to be among those swept up into heaven to be with God before the world comes to an end. I think for some people, the idea of the rapture, that God will take them away from the world to be with him, is a word of comfort. But as we begin the season of Advent, this time when we prepare for God to arrive among us in Christ at Christmas, and when we contemplate God arriving among us when Christ returns, I find a very different word of good news in what Jesus has to say. I find this word of good news all through Matthew's Gospel, the account of Jesus' life and ministry that's going to guide our walk of faith for the coming year. That word is Immanuel. The moment the angel announces Jesus' birth at the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, the angel says, "The child will be called Immanuel." God is with us. And after the resurrection, Jesus' final words to us at the end of Matthew's Gospel are, "Remember, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." With the promise that God is with us at the beginning and at the end, I'm not convinced that in the middle Jesus would change his tune and tell us we need to be whisked away to be with God. This is part of the reason why, for me, the good news for us today is not that God takes us away so we can be with him sometime in the future. The good news is that God is already with us in the daily grind. I say God is with us in the daily grind because there are 2 who are grinding grain, going about the everyday work that makes life possible. One is taken away and one is left behind. But the one who's with God is the one who's left behind. Jesus says his return is going to be like when the flood came in Noah's time. Noah and his family were the ones left behind on the ark, and everyone else was swept away. And after Jesus speaks the words we hear in the gospel today, he goes on to tell 3 parables. In each one, it's the faithful person who remains, who stays put to stand in God's presence, while the one who isn't ready for Jesus' arrival is taken away. The same way that Advent has turned the color for the season to blue, reading these words from Jesus during Advent colors how we hear them. Each week of Advent this year, we're going to be looking at different ways God is with us. This theme colors the way we hear the words Jesus spoke in the gospel this morning. This theme brings out the good news that Jesus isn't only with us in the manger at Christmas, and he won't only be with us when, as we say in the Creed, he will come again in glory to judge the living and the dead. As Pastor and Professor George Buttrick said, God has little Advents each and every day. Or to put it another way, God is with us in the daily grind. These words we hear from Jesus today are part of a long lesson he teaches about how to live as devoted disciples until the daily grind comes to an end and the kingdom of heaven, as he calls it in Matthew's Gospel, becomes fully present. All through this lesson, Jesus repeats the same refrain we hear him use today. Keep awake. When we trust that God is with us in the daily grind, this isn't just a call to keep awake for his return. This is a call to wake up to Christ's continual arrival among us here and now. Since God arrives every day, God is with us in the daily grind. When we trust that God is with us in the daily grind, we know God was already with those two men working in the field, guiding them as they tended to that work that makes life possible. We know God was already with those two women at the mill grinding grain, doing the work that put food on the table. When only one was left, that one was awakened to God's presence with him or her then and there. So where is God with you in your daily grind? Where is God with you in the daily grind of work? Where is God with you in the daily grind of being a husband or a wife, a mother or a father, a son or a daughter, a sister or a brother? Where is God with you in the daily grind of being a disciple who is growing in how your trust that God is with you shapes your life? Let me share an example. I felt God with me in the daily grind of work when a note arrived in the mail for me not too long ago. About 3 weeks before the note arrived, I had presided for a funeral. And based on how the family had responded during and after the funeral, I was pretty sure neither the worship nor my message had actually connected with anyone. When I opened the thank you note, the man's niece wrote, "We take great comfort in your reminder that he's not gone. He's risen." Not only had the message connected with the family, it had given them a word of resurrection hope in the middle of a time of loss. As much as I'd like to think that note is proof that I am a superstar preacher, the truth is even better. Learning that God was able to speak the message of the resurrection that morning means that God was with the family in the daily grind of grief and sorrow, and God was with me in the daily grind of preaching and presiding. As we live through Advent, this season that focuses on all the ways God arrives among us, let's commit to looking for where and how God is with us in our daily grind. Let's keep awake to God's little advents that happen in our lives each day. God arrives in our lives through people who minister to us in all kinds of ways. God arrives in our lives through the people we serve in Christian love. God arrives in our lives through the callings God gives us in our work, in our family, and in our church. God arrives in our lives through all these things and many more. And since God arrives not just at Christmas and not just at the end of the age, but arrives in our lives every day, we know that God is with us in the daily grind. God's presence is a source of comfort and strength when the daily grind seems like it's ground us down. God's presence is an invitation to serve others who are ground down by that daily grind. God's presence is a reminder of the promise that when we return to the ground, God will raise us to resurrection life. Now that I've made an example out of them, you might be more likely to notice those bumper stickers that say, "In case of rapture, this car will be unmanned." But the season of Advent will be a far greater blessing to you if you notice all the ways God is with you in the daily grind. Advent can certainly be an invitation to look up and see if Jesus is coming. But as we look up, we can't forget to look out at the world and see where and how God is with us already. So even as we watch and wait and prepare for Jesus to arrive at Christmas and to arrive at the end of the age, the one we're waiting for is already here. The one we're waiting for is already calling us to use the time while we wait as a chance to grow in our love for Him and for our neighbor. The one we're waiting for is God with us in new life now and in resurrection life to come. Thanks be to God. Amen.